with the design of an organic farming system that's going to be functional in a way that's regenerative to the landscape and sustainable within that landscape, you want to design it in a way that blends with the natural patterns that help shape similar landscapes. So what we're doing with this is looking at how in a similar natural landscape, what are the patterns that those landscape demonstrate in response to some of the forces that shape that landscape. So some of the different patterns or forces that commonly shape a landscape, one is time. So any ecosystem changes over time. It's in a dynamic state of different communities of plants and animals succeeding each other, as it develops in maturity and stability, it tends to stabilize as an old growth forest or some other type of stable ecosystem. But even that is in some state of dynamic shift, as things like fires or other disturbances can move it back to an earlier successional stage, and it will mature back to its late successional stage too. So being aware within the particular agricultural system that you've developed, at what stage of successional development is it? Because in a New Zealand type climate, most of this agricultural systems will mature towards an old growth forest. So at what stage of development towards that old growth forest is that agricultural system at? And what species are going to predictably invade that system in a way to help mature that system towards that old growth forest. And once you're aware of that process, you can help manage that succession and introduce elements of disturbance into that system to maintain it at a certain level of development that you want to be able to acquire that level of production that you're after. The other one is area to do with, it's called zonation. So it's just within any ecosystem there is distinct edges on the outside of that ecosystem or in the middle of the ecosystem. And it depends upon the interaction between different types of ecosystems or the impact of different environmental factors upon that ecosystem. So for example, in an ocean, as the ocean gets shallower and it meets the land, you've got two types of ecosystem there, the ocean and the land ecosystem, and you've got different environmental factors as well. And in a similar way in a forest, you've got this sheltered, protected, quite dim environment within the heart of the forest, and there'd be different species that have adapted to that particular environment. And then as you move out towards the edge of the forest, towards the grassland habitat, it's more open, it's more exposed to the elements, and there's going to be a different set of organisms that best suit that type of habitat. So within the design of your system, you can select species that are most suitable to different positions within that ecosystem and select the species accordingly. So you might have your bigger nut and fruit trees more in the middle of your planting, and the smaller brambles and bushes and shrubs on the outside of the planting, in a way that replicates that diversity and spread of species within a natural ecosystem. Another one is height. So in an ecosystem, again with plants, you tend to get a variation in the height of plants. So you've got your canopy trees that tower above the other trees, and then your sub-canopy trees that form a smaller canopy below that, particularly on the edges of forests. And then your shrubs and ground covers, and you might have vines, and you might have epiphyte plants that are perched up in the trees, and you might have a variety of perennial ground cover mixed into those different layers. So being aware of these different layers within a forest, so the sub-canopy, the canopy, shrubs and ground cover, you can pick productive species that are representative of these different layers and include them in your system. And by doing that, you're increasing the productive output of that system. So it's not just reliant upon one layer of photosynthetic plants that can produce a product, but multiple layers of photosynthetic plants, each one being able to produce a product. So for the same surface area of land, you can multiply your production through these different layers by selecting those that are compatible to each other and are representative of these different layers. And then you got factors such as water and wind. So water molds a landscape. So in New Zealand type landscape, water is quite a major impact upon the sculpturing of the landscape, and it creates rolling, contoured landscape. And winds can also shape landscapes, particularly on the more exposed areas more exposed to the wind, so like the west coast in New Zealand, for example. But wind can also shape the biological systems and help to inform you where the dominant winds are coming from. So if you see winds that are obviously bent in a certain direction, they can help indicate the direction and also the strength of the wind. So depending on how strongly shaped those trees are, you can predict how strong those winds are. The last two patterns are ones of biological growth. So the spiral pattern, for example, or the branching pattern are a predictable sequence of growth of a biological system. And you can use those patterns to design harmonious types of landscaping, particularly around the house and the garden kind of areas that blend with the natural forms that you see in nature. And the last one is a meandering pattern where there's a predictable sequence between the width of the river and the distance between the bends, and it's to do with the water flow and the volume through the water, and how when the water flows through, it bounces off one bank and is redirected in an opposite direction, bounces off that bank, and that pattern's continues through the landscape, and it creates a predictable meandering in a river that flows through a landscape. And again, you can use that pattern to harmoniously create landscapes that blend in with the natural forms. So overall, these types of patterns can really help inform the design of an agricultural landscape. You can think about how that landscape changes over time, how you have distinct areas between different types of ecosystems, and they're occupied by different species, how you have various layers and height that can maximize your production, how you can read the landscape as far as wind goes, or harness the water flowing through that landscape as far as water flow goes, and then also tie in with the natural patterns and the design of that landscape.